In a society which claims to be all about sexual equality, single caring fathers still face overwhelming odds in gaining custody of their children. Our guests today are trying to help level that playing field, and they've written a book all about custody for fathers. And that's what we'll be talking about today on Fathers Are Parents Too. Welcome to Fathers Are Parents Too. We're here today with authors Carleen and Michael Brennan, and Michael is also an attorney in California, and they've written this book, Custody for Fathers. First off, let me ask you, why is there a need for this book?
Well, do you want to go take it?
All right, I'll take it.
All right.
Well, we started with the idea of getting, well, first of all, we had phone calls on the telephone all the time from fathers asking where can we go for help. We want to stay in touch with our children, and they are caring fathers, responsible fathers, and they didn't know where to go for material. And when we researched it, we found that there was very little out there.
Okay.
So we started actually with a pamphlet. And we thought, well, let's get a little pamphlet to help fathers through the mediation session, which is their biggest hurdle.
Okay. This is through you were practicing family law at that time, or?
Practicing family law, and I had won custody of my children, so people came to me and said, well, how'd you do it? And a lot of the techniques and strategies that were relevant in my case weren't in theirs. So as I would go to court, I would watch and take little notes, and we tried to compile them all together and get the word out there.
And that became the pamphlet that you...
And it started from there.
And then these were people calling you that were your clients, or just from...
No, these were just over the telephone, calling
Really?
either through a referral service, knowing Michael had won custody of his children, or through advertisement.
Now, how long ago was that you won custody
Mine
of your
was 8
children?
years ago. And
that was pretty uncommon then, wasn't it?
Real uncommon. And then when I would come in and in front of a judge and say I wanted custody for the father, it was like they would look at me and their eyes would roll, really? Whereas that isn't the case today.
Really?
Not at all.
What are you finding now?
That the judges know that they're proactive fathers, they want to be involved. Why are they there? They're in court because they want to be more involved.
Now let's talk about that for a minute, because I know there's a perception even now in society that fathers go to court and fight for custody to be vexatious, and it's about control and power and dominance, which certainly I have found not to be the case, and it sounds like you found that to be as well. And yet there still seems to be that mindset. People look at those fathers and say they don't care about the kids, it's about money and power. What
comes from the older judges. The older judges say that, one of them told me recently, the only time I've seen a father come in and want custody was he wanted to get back at mom or he wanted to lower his child support. And I've never seen either one. But that's his perception of where they're coming from. And then there are certain female gender-based tactics which have been played out through the years. And I'll give you an example. Mother's lawyer comes in and says to the judge, he wants her back. 3 words, and all of a sudden father's suspect of maybe being obsessive, compulsive, a danger. So that those
trying
kinds
to
of,
get to mom through the kids.
And so right away, red flag goes up, judge thinks, aha, I'm going to be on my toes here. So there are ways to counter all those, and that's why we wrote the book.
Okay, now let's go back to what you were saying, Carleen. You were getting these calls, and now you were, how was it that you were getting them?
Well, I have been working with Michael for 8 years.
Okay, so you worked in the office
Yes,
with him.
yes.
Okay, so you were fielding these calls as well.
Well, not only was I fielding them, but the same questions from these fathers would come up on a daily, weekly basis. And I said to Michael, we were getting the same questions, why can't we put something together, even if it's just a little pamphlet, just to get these guys through what their questions are and their main concerns are to get them over these situations.
So they would call you and they'd get this pamphlet and you would send it to them, and then how was that being received? Were you getting good feedback on that?
Well, they didn't actually go to a pamphlet. The plan was to have a pamphlet, and we were planning on tailoring it to certain issues because, you know, like the move away, which is now real in the news. There are certain problems and issues that come up repeatedly, as opposed to visitation, frustration, or thwarting, which is would be a whole different.
Now, are those issues addressed in the book?
They're all in there, and so instead of coming
you went
out,
straight to the book then, and there was a real need for it. Now, you're in, I think, this is your 2nd edition already, isn't it?
Yes,
so
it
there's
is.
been how many copies of your 1st edition? Do you know?
Yes, 3,500.
Okay, and then the 2nd edition is already out?
It's already out, and it is available now through the bookstores.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about the book, because that's really why you're here, not so much its background. What do you find to be, is there sort of a #1 issue that you're addressing in the book that was sort of common among all of these fathers who are calling? You know, a father would be looking for what in this book?
Well, a father's looking for something, but we see it differently. The thing was missing was lack of preparation. There's no place for a father to go learn about it. The father's rights movement is fractured around the country, and there was no place to go for guidance. A lot of the calls came from grandmothers and girlfriends trying to look for help for their new significant other and not having any place to go. So that we decided that what they need to do is prepare, because court is not an even playing field. And I used to say it's like baseball, where a woman has 3 strikes and you have 1. Although really it could be even 4 or 5 strikes, because if a judge sides on the side of a woman and something weird happens, no one's looking for his job the next day. If he gives custody to the father and it's in the newspaper the next day, the judge has got a CYA problem. So that because of that, the preparation, a father can only make 1 misstep in court, and then it automatically shifts almost.
I did notice, actually, as I was reading this book, that it seemed different from other fathers, quote-unquote, fathers' rights books, in as much as it did deal less with, you know, a lot of the books talk. Well, a lot of the books also talk about, you know, it's very important for a father to be involved with their children, and here, you know, studies say that children who don't have their fathers around, you know, it leads to more crime in youth and teen pregnancy. And it did strike me that a father probably already knows that if he's looking to have some sort of custody with his kid. He knows that they need him. So I did notice that this has a lot of practical advice, and that's probably what you're talking about, preparation, sort of, here's how to get your ducks in order. But you also have in here, here's what you're facing. Here's what you need to know about what people are looking for from you, and what they're trying to get you with. And I think that's got to be very valuable.
Yeah, it's very, very important for the fathers to take a field trip to the courthouse and get a feel for the courthouse itself. You know, going to the court windows, finding out what happens inside of courtroom, do's and don'ts, knowing what they should and should not do, and watching the interaction between the judges, attorneys, and litigants, so that when their day in court comes along, they know how to react, because more than likely they're going to have a similar judge.
Okay. Did you want to add to that?
Well, and go see the exact same judge that they're going to be in front of. The danger is, though, judges have elephants-like memories, so memories like elephants, I had that backwards. They know everybody in the courtroom, so that if an individual is going to go watch a judge, they'd have to be minding their P's and Q's, and maybe even telling the bailiff that they're just there on an educational experience.
A field trip.
Yeah, a field trip.
Because what you're saying is you don't want the judge then, when you're before the judge, to say, weren't you the guy that was, you know, laughing in the back 2 weeks ago? So it sounds almost like this is a book for fathers who are going to go in on their own. Does a father who's already represented by an attorney still need this book?
A lot of attorneys buy it.
The other thing I was going to say is we did gear this book originally for lower income fathers that cannot afford the high cost of litigation, and as it's turned out, fathers from all walks of life are using our book, as well as attorneys.
So tell me, how would a father who does have an attorney already benefit from the book?
Well, a father, when they have an attorney, the attorney does not have the time to go through each thing that happens in their local courthouse, in their courtroom, and therefore they can learn linguistic techniques, they can learn how to testify, they can learn how to deal with a difficult judge, the terminology. A lot of fathers don't even know the terminology.
So this might still give them the preparation.
So it gives them the preparation that the attorney does not have time to give them.
Or will charge them $200 an hour to give them. What about in terms of, have you had situations where a father or an attorney has come back to you, and what I'm thinking is that an attorney might not appreciate a father coming in and saying, well, I read in Michael and Carleen's book that you should be doing this way, and
I haven't had that happen.
So
most of the book, 80% of it is more behavioral than it is legal.
In other words, telling the father how to behave.
Telling them, starting from the beginning, when you go to pick up your local forms, learn the terminology, know how mediation works. I think mediation is the most important chapter in the book.
Why don't you talk about that a little? What is mediation? Because a lot of the people watching may not know. Hopefully they haven't been through the process yet, or they may be in states that don't require it.
Courts now feel that a mediator or a professional counselor could help settle differences and resolve parenting problems if they are seen before court, and sometimes it ranges from a week to the day of court. The difference is in the recommendations. In some counties, in some courts, the mediator makes a recommendation to the court, and in other counties they make no recommendation, feeling that free and open discussion and mediation might work a resolution. So in either in either event, the father should act the same. So we cover it in both cases, but the language used in mediation, doing well in mediation, which is a woman's area. Most of the PhDs and the mental health professionals are women, and men get in there, and the common thing I hear is a man comes out and says, I didn't get a chance to get a word in edgewise. They were passing recipes back and forth. I was there to talk about my child, and the women came in and connected. And that's a common trait, because there are women who know, wives and soon to be ex-wives, who are going in to try and finesse the field. And women are very clever. They walk in, look around the office, figure out what the mediator likes and dislikes, and then throw out some, oh, I know, I once had a boxer puppy, or whatever. And then the man feels he's waited, hasn't slept for 2 nights to give his version of the story, and they're off to the races on something else. So that there's a way to handle that.
And I was going to say also, women are far better at communicating their words and body language and their actions than men. Men are used to holding things inside, and women, they just let everything fly, and so it's much easier for them.
Now I have a question. You just mentioned there's a way for a father to handle that situation. So how do you know, let's say Carleen and I are here and we're talking about the boxer puppy, and you're there, and you know, I'm saying, gee, that's a really nice boxer puppy. I don't really want to talk about your kids, and you're there lost in the dust. How do you handle that?
The way for a man to handle it is to pull backward visually and say nothing.
Okay.
And let them go and still say nothing, and then cause a tremendous embarrassing pause on the part of the mediator and the woman.
What if they never stop talking?
Well, I mean,
Carleen and I could just, you know.
Theoretically, that could happen. The mediator has to do a job.
Right.
So then she wants to segue into the mediation.
So it's to make
so the man wants to telegraph, you are wasting my time. I'm here to talk about my children.
And at some point, hopefully, the mediator realizes, wow, we've just totally alienated and shut this guy out, and that's not why we're here. And hopefully, that's not why we're
and
there.
wasted time.
I've actually read, I think it was Professor Maccabee from Stanford said that they had found in a study they did that men typically go into these negotiating situations very differently, as you said, than do women, in part because they have a different expectation about what fairness and equity is about, and I think that leads into what you're saying, you know, they're there to talk about the kids, but also because they tend to be much more upfront about what they really want. They put all their cards on the table, whereas women are a little bit better about being cagey and keeping, you know, sort of that poker face. Is that what you found as well?
I find that a lot. And also, but men also are very good at games. They grow up in sports, and if they know the rules, they'll obey the rules. But they're getting into a foreign territory.
They don't know the rules.
They don't know the rules. They don't know what the rules are, and they don't know what the playing field is. And they get very frustrated. And then when a man gets frustrated and bangs doors, bailiffs come running, and all of a sudden he gets categorized as maybe a threat, and he could lose it just like that.
Now, I've also heard judges say, even judges that are considered to be very fair, that they wanted to give a greater or more equal custody, but that they found the father was their own worst enemy in just terms of how they can, as you said, conduct themselves or their expectations or their demands. Would you be able to give, say, maybe top 3 mistakes that you've found fathers commonly make that they should avoid?
It depends on the judge, and that's why it's real important to talk to other fathers who've been to the system, go to the courthouse, sit in the courtroom of the judge if they know which one is going to be theirs, and watch how he deals with people. For example, a very famous family law judge told me, he says, oh, your client is one of those picture cases, meaning he brought in pictures. He says, you know, the guy that had the most pictures, he's in San Quentin for attempting to murder his wife, and the second most famous is on Terminal Island. So here's a judge, that's what he thinks.
That's his buzz, his hot button.
It's not a good idea to bring in pictures to that judge. So if you know these idiosyncrasies of the judges, it's a lot easier to deal with them.
Carleen, do you have any?
No, because I'm not in the court system, so I'll leave that up to Michael.
Oh, okay. Now, what I'm wondering is the two of you speak, you know, at national conferences, and you've done other shows and such, and you are, as I understand it, you have a child from a previous marriage, right? And you're a mom, and I get this, and I'm just wondering, do you get this as well? Do people come up to you when you're done speaking and say, how can you speak for, you're a traitor? How can you speak from fathers when, you know, you're a mom? And have you run into that? And if so, how do you handle that?
Almost very rarely. The only thing that really gets me uptight is when I run into women that say, gosh, the support I'm getting from father only pays my rent, and I just sort of seethe, and then I come back from there. But basically, I have not had too much feedback on that because we're trying to elevate fathers to more than the standard, which is only 20%. You have a great dad, a great mom, They're both actively involved with their children on a regular basis. And when the non-custodial parent leaves the nest or the home, and it's normally the father, he only gets to see his child maybe once every 2 weeks.
Right.
And maybe moms is going to sabotage the telephone calls. So we're just trying to elevate fathers to more time with their children, to the shared parenting.
And that's really what it's all
Yeah,
about.
and that's
for
what
the
it's all
kids.
about.
Okay, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we have some questions for you from the audience. All right, we'll be right back.
I'm a dad and a member of FREE, the Fathers' Rights and Equality Exchange. Most dads out there would love to spend more time with their kids and to be a real part of their lives. FREE wants to change the notion that all divorced and unmarried dads are irresponsible, because most of us dads are responsible and we're working for the chance to share the parenting. If you want to learn more, please call us at 1-500-4DADS. That's 1-500-4DADS. And remember, fathers are parents too.
Welcome back to Fathers Are Parents Too. We're here today with authors Carleen and Michael Brennan, and they've written Custody for Fathers, and we have some questions from the audience for Carleen and Michael. Yes?
Yes, enjoyed your presentation very much. I understand where you're coming from in terms of why you wrote the book, to make the playing field more level for fathers, but why should we have custody for fathers any more than we have custody for mothers? And after this, fathers start getting custody, where should we go?
The system works right now. One has to win custody. It's not a joint 50-50 situation, so you either win custody or you lose custody. I think altruistically in the future, and a lot of the joint custody fathers' rights groups would want it to be 50-50 parenting, but it doesn't work that way. One wins and one loses. So, you know, I didn't make the rules this way. This is the way they are. So if you want to win custody, you have to ask for full custody.
So it's custody for fathers because the default seems to be custody
Yes.
for mothers, and that's... Yes?
I have heard that the playing field, as you say, is not level when a father wants custody of the child, and what the father actually had to do was prove that the mother was unfit by drug usage in front of the child or prostitution in front of the child or something like that. Is it really that unbalanced? And what does it take for a father to get custody? Can he just show that he's a better father or a better parent?
Has to do a much better job than a woman would have to do, and I think that was the norm years ago, 5 years ago. I think it's changing more, and for every father who wins custody, that means there's someone in the neighborhood who a father's doing a good job, and then everyone in the neighborhood will accept it, and then judges see, well, it worked, and so then it becomes more prevalent. So it's a numbers game, and we don't have enough fathers with custody.
The other thing I'd like to mention is because of the societal changes with mothers working as well as fathers today, I think the fathers are coming up with the custody issue the same as women used to come up with wanting to be CEOs and presidents of organizations and coming up in the business world. So I think that the younger judges are seeing that fathers are taking a more active role with their children than ever before.
Thank you. Yes?
Yes, I've been a divorced father for the last 8 years. My wife left me for greener pastures, so to speak, a long time ago. And since then, my children were very young, 2 boys. And currently, I'm finding that, well, I haven't seen them in almost 2 years now because she has just totally disregarded court orders. And I'm in a financial position, where I'm in a pro per access to the court. And I was just wondering, what can you do without looking like somebody, a whiner, so to speak, when the mother won't let you interact with your children, and to keep you from actually seeing them, and at the same time I feel that she's manipulating them to the point where I have no chance to talk with them, to the point where she's even pulled them out of school and put them in a home schooling program for themselves, and I don't get to see them at all. Is there anything that a father can do to stop them from manipulating?
You know, what you're describing is parent alienation syndrome, and there's only one PhD who's written on it, Gardner, out of Baylor, I think it is, and he classifies it as different levels, mild, moderate, severe. And so you're talking about a woman who has severe parent alienation syndrome, who is doing payback through the children to you. And more mental health professionals then should get on board and write more articles and have more seminars, is the fact that there's going to be 2 dysfunctional children out of this situation if it continues to go on. Now, Gardner says that when you have severe parent alienation syndrome, the answer is you take the kids away from the alienating parent and give them to you. So that's what Gardner would say to do, but he's only one out there. So there need to be more Gardners.
So Michael, what can a father, if he was to come to you and say, I need you to represent me, and we need to try and take steps to get my children back, at least to some sort of reasonable timeshare, what would you do if you were representing him?
He's pro-per
Right.
because of his resources, so he needs to remain pro-per. So he actually is in a better example because he can wear through her attorney resources if he goes slow and constantly keeps the push on through order to show causes, maybe for contempts, and contempts are very complicated and just, I hate to get into it, but right now, but contempts, the way a judge deals with it, it's like grounding a teenager.
Okay, so wait, excuse me, let me just interject. You mean contempt of court because
yes.
she's not honoring the court order
Right.
for custody,
For the
for
visitation.
timeshare? Okay, okay.
So a man can bring a contempt, file a contempt, and the judge will play along with it and go, lady, you're not obeying it. But he doesn't really want to hold her in contempt and throw her in jail. So it's a matter of filing the contempt, pushing the contempt, letting the judge say, lady, I'll throw you in jail, and not standing there saying, yes, take her right now, and letting the judge go with it, so that to keep in the system, to keep the system going with you, and eventually wearing it down. Getting a judge to throw it out to a mental health professional who will give the judge some backup that the kids are going to become dysfunctional. I mean, that's pretty common and standard, and that's what's going to happen.
I've actually heard it said that judges often want to make those decisions where they want to perhaps allow the father, give the father more time, or hold a mother, not necessarily in contempt, but really let her know she needs to be more cooperative, but that they're, as you said, afraid for their jobs, and so that the parties or the attorney's job is really to give the judge solid reason, a good foundation to make that decision. And it sounds like you're saying that so that if say this gentleman could come in and say, let's go to a counselor, and then the counselor tells the judge, well, Your Honor, you better reprimand this mother, the judge is more likely to do it. Is that?
And he wants recent court dates. He wants to come back in a month for review and come back in a month. And if, in some courts, they don't want you to come back in a month, so you have to refile, come in, very pleasant. Body language has to be very toned down, that I'm not going to give up.
So it's really sort of the rabbit and turtle thing, or slow and steady wins the race, or all those other cliches, but it sounds like they're very applicable for
and
this
another thing
fellow.
judges do, I notice, when they have a woman like that, they're pushing her comfort zone. So they say, well, can he have Tuesday nights from 5 to 7? And the woman goes, oh, no, they have softball here, they have to be home earlier, and they have to get in bed early. And those judges that back off and that don't push that zone are the ones where the problems are.
Now, are there tactics you advise for a father in that case, for example? Maybe he can volunteer, well, I'll take them softball. I'm willing to use that as my time with them to show that he's willing to be very cooperative and do whatever it takes. Is that
the more reasonable a father looks and then keeps his mouth shut, let the judge then stress the woman on her unreasonableness. I think the bottom line is you just have to keep the push going. You can't give up. That's what
follow up in that regards, because I have been doing this for several years now, but I find that as a pro-per person in court, that the judges tend to put you off, so to speak, because you don't have that mental, like you were talking about, that mental knowledge of the language that they're looking for when they talk with other attorneys. And then you feel like you get caught in that position where you don't have the money, so it's a continual process, and you end up spending everything that you do have and losing your jobs trying to get to that situation where you want to get to see your kids. And I was just wondering if there's any way that you can stop that vicious cycle. It's a catch-22, where the money that's all going out to take off the time from work, to change your jobs, to cohere with the court orders, and then you don't get to see the kids because they're way out of another area of the state. And then you get the vindictiveness there, as you were talking about, where you don't get to see your children, and it seems that the judges, it's a catch-22 situation, and they just don't want to be involved with that kind of thing. It's a political nightmare for them.
It almost sounds like sometimes I think there are judges that they don't want to deal with the case anymore. Is there something fathers can do then?
Make friends with the clerk and the bailiff. Find out what they like, what they don't like. Some places are more liberal about accepting candy and flowers and little trinkets and things, so that they will then see that your case gets attention from the judge. And don't give up.
We have another question.
You're mentioning that you are helping the father to prepare for the courtroom scenario. But isn't it also the case that many cases are actually kind of decided before the father gets into the courtroom? namely at an evaluation, for example, a 730 evaluation? And what part of your book applies to the preparation of such a 730 evaluation, or just any
Well, 730 is a California term for a custody investigation. Judges like, in close calls, to send them out to mental health professionals to do a workup, and they get back about a 40, 50-page report. And the last 2 pages is what everybody flies to, because those are the recommendations. And I've been a judge in chambers. He just goes to the back and says, okay, why shouldn't I do this? So that the recommendations feed off of all of the contacts with the mental health professional. And I also know some mental health professionals that the biggest thing they go off of, and remember they're doing Milan tests and Millar tests and ink blots, everything, they go off of the secret video camera in their waiting room, you know, seeing if one of the parents is saying, now remember to tell them this, or swatting their kid, and then when they get into the session not doing it. So that if you know that, that's helpful.
Okay, now I have a question that audience guest asked, where in the book, if you have information about how to prepare prior to ever going into the court, and I know that you do. But I'm wondering also, for example, the audience member before that, and he used the term pro per, and I took that to mean without an attorney. Are there other resources besides your book that you would recommend for fathers to get support, or what do they do? Where do they go?
Well, with the second edition, what I did is I put a resource section in the back, and I took the largest fathers organizations across the country and put them in the back of the book with the phone number, with the facts, and a little bit about the organization itself. And then I also listed magazines, fathers magazines, and also pertinent books dealing with specific issues,
Okay,
whether it's on false allegations, which is a very big issue, paternity. They don't know that it's treated exactly the same as a dissolution of marriage. So just some little pointers in the back of the book. And of course, Barnes & Noble is now handling it.
Okay, so not only can they get practical advice from the book, but if it's not in your book tells them where to look for it.
Exactly.
Now we just have a few seconds left, and why don't you mention Barnes & Noble's? Is it through all the Barnes & Noble stores? Can they order it? Can they call you directly? Do you have an order number? What's the best way for someone to get this book?
Well, the best thing for them to do is to order it through our office, as far as getting a direction of where to go, because we have attorneys across the country buying our book, we have organizations across the country, and also bookstores.
Okay, do you want to give the number?
The phone number is area code 714-646-9842.
Okay, one more time and then we'll say goodbye.
714-646-9842.
Michael, Carleen, thank you so much for being
Thank you,
here.
Annie.
And audience, thank you for coming, and we'll see you next time on Fathers Are Parents Too.